I'm Kathleen Day. I'm the board president of Women in Planning and Development, at least for the next month or so here. My day job is I'm a project manager for preservation of affordable housing. So I work in affordable housing development. Welcome, everybody. Women in Planning and Development, if you're not familiar with us, we're, I want to say, 27-year-old organization that brings together women who work in the vast diversity of fields related to urban planning here in Chicago. And normally in July, we would have our annual picnic. I mean, not to rub it in or anything, but we would usually meet in Millennium Park. And we would, enjoy a picnic together and watch the music, taking some music and all that. But in lieu of that, we're going to have this this discussion tonight in partnership with APA Illinois, and we have the opportunity to talk a little bit more without having to talk over loud music. So there's that. After our discussion, which is co-sponsored, as I mentioned, by APA Illinois, we'll have a member-focused part of the program that'll be a little bit more informal and a chance for us to socialize best as we can in these weird times. So I wanted to thank everybody for all the generous donations that we've received that will be going to 3 local nonprofits: Little Black Pearl, Brave Space Alliance, and the Bail Project. As of a few moments ago, we had $1,900 raised, and WPD will be kicking in another $500. So we'd love to, we want to encourage you to donate again if you're so inclined, or to donate if you haven't already, because we're aiming for an even $3,000 to spread across these 3 different organizations. I did want to take a moment before we get started to kind of highlight who's in the room here, because we don't have the chance to, socialize with a drink in our hand. This is very typical of a WPD event if you haven't been to one. We're a rather big tent, and so we have a wide variety of people joining us tonight. So we have about 100 registrants. I don't know how many people we have here, but I was taking a look at the list here, and I can't even name off all the fields that are represented here. It ranges from historic preservation to transportation, community development finance. We have people who work for the city of Chicago, for alderman's office, for nonprofits, for private companies. Really runs the gamut and gives you a sense of the diversity of our membership and of our circle. I won't, at the risk of leaving people out, I won't list all the people here tonight who have served previously on the WPD Board of Directors, but I did want to call out a few notable folks who made it here tonight. Some people, as I mentioned, the organization's 27 years old, and tonight we have here Cassandra Francis, who's one of the co-founders of WPD, and some kind of old guard WPD board members, Katrina von Vonkenberg, Tara Haymaker, Caitlin Ritter, and a bunch of people who have served more recently. So welcome, and we're so glad that you're here. I'm going to pass it on to Emily Egan, who's also a former WPD board member, who represents our generous event partner, APA Illinois. So let me take it away.
I'm not muted. Thank you, Kathleen. Appreciate it. My name is Emily Eaton. I use she, her pronouns. Currently, I am the Assistant City Planner for the City of Elmhurst, and I'm also on the board for American Planning Association, Illinois Chapter, APA Illinois. As Kathleen mentioned, I was on the WPD board 2015 through 2017, and so I'm just really pleased that these 2 amazing organizations can come together for this important conversation and to raise funds for our community. The motto for APA is creating great communities for all. And I think, as Kathleen mentioned, the organizations that we're donating to tonight, these organizations are really doing that. I had the opportunity when I was in undergraduate school to teach an art appreciation class for incarcerated men, and it was a phenomenal experience. So I'm especially excited to be donating to the Bail Bond Project. I want to just briefly tell you a couple things that APA Illinois is working on. we recently released a statement that doubled down on our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're working on actions to follow up that statement. So we're developing an anti-racism toolbox with resources and educational materials. We're reviewing and updating our policies and procedures, and a really exciting event that we have in the fall. It's called Upholding Equity in Planning, and that is going to be a virtual event, and it's a partnership with the APA Wisconsin organization. So stay tuned for that, and I know you're not here to hear me talk, so I'm going to pass it over to Brittany Batts. She is the WP+D Marketing Chair, and she's tonight's moderator.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you again to our co-host, APA Illinois. As Emily mentioned, my name is Brittany Batts, and I'm the Associate Manager of Projects and Research at the National Main Street Center, and I'm the WP+D Board Marketing Chair. And I'm so happy to be joining this great group of panelists today. Before we welcome them, I would like to take a moment to recognize that today's topic, Black Lives Matter, the Chicago perspective, is an enormous one. And we don't expect to cover it all in 45 minutes, but we'll definitely try. We wanted this to be as interactive as possible, but realize the limitations on having so many people on the Zoom call. So please feel free to say who you are, where you're from in the chat section, and introduce yourself. We'll also have the opportunity to ask any questions you have for the panelists in the chat as well. We will select at the end a few questions to answer as time allows at the end of our full discussion. I also want to point out that you will see that we have added some basic definitions to help make sure everyone is on the same page about words and definitions that we'll be using in this discussion today in the PowerPoint. We hope this will be an engaging start to an ongoing conversation that WP+D plans to continue going forward. WP+D has already formed a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee on our board and plans to spend the upcoming months taking a deeper dive into WP+D's internal processes while continuing the engaging of our members in thought-provoking events around these topics. So I hope we can all give a warm welcome to our panelists today and recognizing that this is a huge topic to tackle and let them know we appreciate them beginning the discussion and sharing their perspectives. Let's all give a warm welcome by waving to Camille Applewhite, Monica Chada, and Lauren Lewis. So at this moment, we want to welcome Camille, Monica, and Lauren. Please introduce yourselves and tell us a little about your background, what you're working on right now in relation to racial equity in Chicago. Camille, if you'd like to start.
Sure, thank you so much, Brittany. I'm really glad to be here. So my name's Camila Applewhite. I work in landscape architecture, and I've been in the city now working professionally for about 7 years. I'm also the co-founder of a group called BlackSpace Chicago. We've been in the city now for about 2.5 years, and our work focuses on supporting Black people in social and in environmental spatial interaction. So designers, architects, planners, etc. We support creating Black space for these designers. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
All right, and Monica?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's great to be part of the discussion. I'm excited to see a lot of familiar faces, both through the chat and on screen. So welcome, everyone, and thank you. I am Monica Chada, founder of Civic Projects Architecture, and we work throughout the city, but a lot of our work is focused on the South Side, a lot of Invest Southwest neighborhoods, a lot of historically disinvested neighborhoods. We're struggling with the words, which I think is something we're going to talk about today, but really kind of working on inclusivity and equity in the work we do every day.
Great, and I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Brittany, for inviting me. I'm Lauren Lewis. I work with LIST Chicago. If you haven't heard, we are the the people behind the scenes with the quality of life plans, but it's really about our partners in our neighborhoods that are the stars. And so all of my work is around racial equity and building capacity in our communities, especially the ones I grew up in, and how they can be self-sustaining. And I know we'll talk about this later on, but at LIST Chicago, with the fact of the recent, I don't know what you want to call it, but it's been going on for years. But the disinvestment, the hatred, and it really comes out in how our communities, my communities have been invested in or disinvested. So like I said, I'm happy to be here. I've been with LISC for at least almost 2 years, but my work has always been around making it better for my people.
Thank you, Lauren. So our first question is, was there discussion or has anything changed in your workspace since the George Floyd protest? I would like to start with Camille.
So with BlackSpace, we did make a statement regarding the demonstrations that have been happening over the past few months. I mean, this is something we have to recognize as one of the largest resurgence of a movement since the 60s. And I think this is something that we all have to kind of take ownership of in this time in our history. So something that we've done is to create more space for designers to feel what they feel. And we've been having virtual calls and discussions. And we've also been working on a project where we highlight Black-owned businesses during this pandemic. So there's a lot of inequities that are happening in Black and brown neighborhoods. So we're trying to highlight business owners that are prevailing in this very trying time. But I think when it comes to these demonstrations, this is uncovering a very flawed system. So we have to kind of take a step back and redesign what has been previously designed to not be equal in a sense. So we have to take a step back and figure out what we're going to do to redesign the foundation of what our work is.
Thank you for sharing, and I couldn't agree more. Monica, what are your thoughts?
So many thoughts. So I think there's a couple things. I think one of the things we've been doing recently is we've already been, we try that our work, we make it a point of working in communities in an inclusive way. And there, I know the definitions of the words are going to be sort of something that keeps coming up. But I would say that what's been happening recently has really reinforced our mission and reinforced some of the objectives and the ways forward. And I think I have it. Oh, I can't. We talked about using resources that are available in communities, with and for communities. And for example, this summer we're doing a entire kind of research based and case study based work with interns, with students, all around ideas about equitable development. And that's another word I struggle with, but the idea of how can we build resources for and with communities in an inclusive and equitable way. So all of this has just really reinforced this work and made it incredibly important and incredibly relevant to the conversations we're having today.
Thank you so much for sharing. You kind of tittle into another question that we'll be asking later on, but I thank you so much for sharing. Lauren, any additional comments on that?
Yeah, so I'll just be brief, but LISC has been, and it's a community development financial institution for 40 years. It's been around. We have a Black CEO that's been here since, I want to say, this might be his 4th year. But in this time, we've learned not to sugarcoat. Who are we impacting? You know, who are we truly wanting to help? We have to name and call Black people. We have to name and call brown people. And so what we've been working on is to be as bold as possible. If it's working towards reparations, then we're going to be standing alongside of policy and sticking it to it. So it's just being bolder during this time, even and forever.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's no time to sugarcoat at this moment, and we definitely appreciate your boldness on the topic. I want to thank you all for sharing that information with us, and I'd like to move on to the next question. So this next question, I want to ask, can you talk about some examples of systems that you have currently had in place to ensure equitable places and spaces for all? I'd like to start with Camille once again. Sorry, Camille.
So I guess if we're still asking the question of, are there systems in place for equitable design, I guess I'll put in a basic term. I guess the short answer is no, in a lot of ways. The systems are in place, but they were never designed to be equitable. There's plenty of work being done to undo these inequitable systems, but this is where we have to start. We have to undo the damage that has been done. And then we have to look to new systems where we, in fact, see that all people are equal. And we have to redesign these systems.
I think that's
so many great points. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an absolutely great point. Something that was said when we had a conversation the other day when we were sort of prepping was this idea of designing inclusive spaces, but the idea that spaces are for everyone. And I think there's another challenge with that is also, you know, what does inclusive look like, right? Like we've been having a lot of conversations around BlackSpace recently, and it's, and you know, to sort of state the obvious, but it's like, I am not of or from or born in some of the many of the communities that we work in. I was actually born in Canada. And how do we navigate that conversation, right? Because we can have affinity, we can have empathy, but unless we're inclusive and engage the conversation with who is impacted, whatever community you're in, I don't think we can move kind of forward in a meaningful way. You know, the day any of you see me pretend to know what I'm talking about and, you know, take over the conversation, well, just, you know, stop me there, right? That's not the way we can build on and from the issues that are happening currently, but like, again, sort of conversations that should have been happening for a long time, but have come to the forefront with the current political and current situations that are going on.
Thank you. Yeah, and I definitely agree with you. Being able to look at things from a different lens definitely brings a different perspective. Lauren?
So one of our partners at Teamwork Inglewood, Executive Director Cecilia DeMello, said it best. And I think, Monica, you were talking about how Invest Southwest, but the need to co-create. If I don't want to go into how Invest Southwest came about, but we have to, that's a start for investment. But if you're not co-creating with the community, that means that you're just pretty much you providing them a spoon and they have to deal with it and eat it while the planners go back to their homes and Winnetka. So, so that's one thing. We've seen it. They have round tables, and Inglewood stuck it to them, and kudos to them. Another platform that is happening is, and that's on the move, is One Chicago for All, which is an alliance that is comprised of our quality of life planning partners, plus some new communities program partners, as well as some financial opportunity centers like CARA. But that table is comprised of community leaders, and one of the reason why I kind of came to LISC was they had this large forum for the mayoral debates, and there was like we had about 12 people, 12 potential mayors, and it was well organized, but though it was led by community members, and to this day they still lead that agenda on, you know, what we truly want to see our city do, and be, and it's a start. They lead that whole process. We just convene and do what they say at LISC. So it's that co-creation.
Thank you so much for sharing, Lauren. That's very important in the process. Next, I'd like to go into the next question. I know you've given us a lot to think about, but what does allyship, racial equity, and intersectionality in planning look like to you? And how can we as planners make more equitable spaces?
So I'm gonna jump in, just Camille, so you don't have to take the first stab. But I mean, we've already, it's sort of been touched on, right? I think the talk of co-creation and sort of defining what are inclusive spaces, right? We're challenged because I think Lauren made a really good point. So we talk about, I want to say this right. We invite people to set the table with us. We don't invite people to come to the table, right? Like, there is a shared expertise between everyone who's at the table, and there's a shared opportunity to define what the challenges and opportunities are. So sort of building upon what Lauren was saying, that we're kind of looking at the idea that everyone's an expert. So if you're talking about an inclusive space, you're trying to talk about some of the issues, we welcome both the inside and outside perspectives to try to understand what's going on. It doesn't make everything right. It doesn't mean we can answer and solve all of the issues, but having that opportunity to hear and listen, I think everyone on the panel has touched on that in different ways, but like, you know, if we're not listening, we're not doing the right thing, right?
I completely agree. I think when it comes to doing community engagement and co-creating with community members, there has to be a genuineness, and people can see straight through like an agenda. If we're just filling this requirement, or we're just doing this because it was in the contract to have these 3 public meetings, there's no genuineness there. And if there's no if you're not genuine, then you don't really have the place to be in that space. I don't think it's worth their time or yours. So you have to be more genuine about the work that you want to do and the work that you want to see done. So like to Monica's point, working in communities of color, if that's the work you want to see done, get it done, but make sure you have the right people on your team and the right people on your side, and you're working with the right people in that community. And also, the community members need to be heard. They need to feel like they're a part of the table, and they can, how you so eloquently put the table together. Was it, Monica? Build the table?
Actually, build the table. I mean,
yes,
really, it should be build the table.
Yes.
Set the table. Yeah.
Exactly. So the whole thing has to be a part of the whole process, and just kind of giving people that you're working with in communities little nuggets about the work that you're doing in their community isn't very genuine. So I think we really just have to kind of sit back in ourselves and decide what it is that we want to do. And if this is the work that you are passionate about doing, then you have to be genuine and honest about that with yourself first.
I agree.
Yeah, and everything that was said, and the importance of understanding that these smaller organizations, a lot of Black-led organizations are stretched thin, and understanding where they come from and being compassionate in that space. And then also when social justice is not happening, we all have to speak up, because it becomes an all of us problem. Downtown was messed up for everyone. So, and all communities were messed up for it. Yeah. So it's making sure that we all speak up and we all use our platforms at every time we can.
I so agree. We all have a role in the matter and in the issues.
Oh,
Thank you so much. Now we'll have a Q&A section. Just pulling a couple of questions from the audience.
I have a question. Let me know if it's too windy for you guys to hear me.
Nope.
Okay. So, in thinking about building, I think, as a person working in the development space, my preeminent question is always like, how can we diversify and bring true equity to the capital access portion of this work? I think we talk a lot about place making and about community inclusion and diversity in the developer space. But, as a person doing this work, I'd love to see some of those conversations broaden to include how we widen, and remove some of those barriers to equity. To capital.
I think that's an amazing, really relevant question. It's something we struggle with all the time because on the construction side, right? It's really, really hard to work with minority contractors, quite frankly, to be able to scale up, right? And it's a huge challenge. So I can follow up with the name of one organization that I'm blanking on, but this idea of sort of micro support and micro lending, it's not a solution, but what I'm hearing a lot more conversation about is how do you provide the back of house, right? How do you provide some of the infrastructure to smaller general contractors, as an example, developers, in a way that allows the opportunity to scale up. So as a really, really simple example, right? We write all the lien waivers, the contract documentation, like in order to get paid by the bank or Chicago Community, Chicago Title, we're writing the documentation so that our subs can get paid. Because nobody has the manpower to have, you're a small company, you don't have like somebody sitting at their computer all day taking care of this. So I think the more we can build that capacity and those resources in a collective way, that would make a big difference. And that business support, both training and literal support, I think make a big difference or can be impactful.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you, Monica. We'll be pulling a couple of additional questions from the chat, so please, you guys feel free to put some chat in the live chat below. I'll be reading off a couple of ones right now that I'm receiving. So we have a question from Mary. Do any of you work in the Austin neighborhood? What recommendations do you have to your mostly white neighbors in Oak Park for institutional perspective, such as government, park districts, and school districts?
So, of course, there's a quality of award-winning quality of life plan by Austin coming together in that neighborhood. I'm proud of them. What I would suggest is that it's more about that allyship. We know Oak Park Police, we know that the high school has not always been morally right, and it's important to speak up on those initiatives, even though it might not impact you, it's impacting your neighbors. So just speaking, being vocal and listening and asking questions on how you can be of assistance in those spaces. Austin is real close to Oak Park, so kissing cousins, literally. If you go just 2 seconds away, over the street block. So it's definitely seeing how you can be of assistance.
Well, and it's been assistance in a couple directions. So full transparency, we actually live in Oak Park, so we're on the other side of that fence. And I think one thing that's been really encouraging, because this is where allyship really comes in, it's taken Oak Park a long time to sort of acknowledge that there are race issues in Oak Park, right? It's taken a long time to the inequity you just spoke about at OPRF at the high school. These are all things that are really more in the recent conversation, or at least more acknowledged. Are we all the way there? Probably not. But there are organizations now that are actively reaching out and actively looking to work together. And if you want to send me a direct email or note, I can at least list those, and if appropriate, provide introductions. But the idea of allyship and discussion around racial equity is kind of where we need to start. It's not the answer, it's not the solution, but what is happening right now is residents in Oak Park are being more proactive to actually recognize their own prejudices and acknowledge that as a starting point to move forward.
Camille, any additional?
I would just like to add, yes, allyship is where non-POC colleagues and coworkers, this is where we have to start. I saw like a little question, I don't know if you're going to ask it, Brittany, but about how to provide support for your POC coworkers and colleagues in this time. I think giving them a space. I mean, if they're your coworker and you don't really speak to them very often, but you can kind of tell that they're probably having a hard time right now. I mean, just reach out. I think just in giving them space to speak how they feel, and offer that's where allyship starts. You have to start with these connections and allow the space for speaking up, because I think traditionally being a POC person of color in a majority white office, it's really difficult to speak up about how you feel in certain situations, especially regarding race, in the workplace or not in the workplace, etc. But I think giving an olive branch and allowing the space to speak up is a really good first step.
And can I add stepping out of the way too? Right. Knowing when to step down, knowing when to step away to allow that space.
Exactly, because we don't need any white saviors. That's one thing we don't want. So just try to refrain from that.
Thank you all so much. We have another question. What are some positive things or changes that you've seen come out of recent events or organizations? Example of good work, specifically in urban planning.
That one's a challenge because planning and design are long-term efforts. in terms of like seeing results from something that's happened recently is a little bit harder. I would say just in my opinion, the activation that's occurring, the idea of, you know, taking over public space, whether that's through art activation or physical activation, or taking ownership of spaces that haven't been typically shared, is a starting point. But I think this is a much deeper, longer effort when we're talking about sort of planning communities, design communities, where it's, I mean, art systematically, like even if we just look at the words and the language, it's been systematically oppressive, quite frankly, right? Like the language, the words, the history to some of the initial ideas behind some of the planning and design that occurs has come from, I think Lauren mentioned it earlier, right, has come from systems of oppression, right? It hasn't come from an equal footing. So I guess maybe we start by acknowledging that, but we also have to take on these spaces, and then we also have to recognize it's a really, really long road. That was not the most optimistic answer, but.
Thank you. Camille and Lauren, do you have any additional comments on that question?
I think we have to start somewhere. So to Monica's point, yes, this will be a long road, but I think holding ourselves accountable and realizing that systems that were designed 100 years ago can be redesigned. So we're not stuck in the systems that were put in place 100 years ago. We have the capacity, we have the knowledge, and we have the wherewithal to redesign these systems so we can band together. And we also have to look at our political structure. I don't want to get too political, but we have to realize that also affects this work. So we have to remember that and not take that lightly.
Right, and just from a housing perspective, even though I don't like the lottery approach, but if you look into the Nehemiah homes in New York, it's promoting Black home ownership. There's a rent to own process, and so that people could work, live, and residents can go to school within that space. So if we can have more of those models, I know North Lawndale is in the process of trying to expand their Black home ownership, their homeowners association. So it just get it, because people are leaving Chicago all the time, especially due to violence concerns. So it's really trying to get back to what do we need for us to create a safe community, and all of those components that go with it.
Well, Lauren, I love where you're going with that point, and something that this is where I think the time is now. Like the earlier question, or sort of the fact that we're having this discussion based on recent events. One of the things we've been discussing is, and I had this conversation with someone else, is the idea of feeling unsafe in public space, right? The idea of feeling unwelcome in space or uncomfortable in space. This is new to a certain percentage of the population. This is not new to all of the population. So all of a sudden, you actually have a much broader audience that is beginning to have discussions around and understand that you can actually be in public and feel unsafe or feel uncomfortable. And in this case, we might be talking about disease, but obviously, you know, in many neighborhoods, the idea of feeling safe in public spaces has just not existed. And so I think one thing we can do right now is, because there's a broader understanding of this insecurity, maybe this is where we came, to Camille's point, start making some of those changes.
Thank you. Thank you all. We also have another question from Lenice. Her question is, how do you approach highlighting the root cause of Black and Brown disinvestment to white stakeholders who are looking to help build the table?
Can you say that again? I'm trying to find it in the list, but I'm not quite finding it.
How do you approach highlighting the root causes of Black and Brown communities' disinvestment to white stakeholders who are looking to help build the table?
I think, I don't know, this might not be the right answer. I think calling people out might be part of it. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I think if we can actually have real conversations about how even in allyship, there can be difficulty in having affinity or support. So it's like, this is where language comes in, or kind of why are you doing what you're doing, or how are you doing what you're doing. So I think people that are having the opportunity to have that conversation also need to be able to bring it down to sort of a language and a, like I can say I care about someone, but I may not understand what that means, right? I can say I want to support an art, like, oh, I support Black Lives Matter, I gave $50, right? That is different than going into a community and being part of a physical effort or something else, right? Like activation, right? Actively making change. And I think if we can have that conversation more, like how do you not give it lip service, right? And I'm oversimplifying it, but how can you be an active participant? So you can be an ally, but I think you also have to be active in the process.
Very great point.
I just wanted to add like a little piece to that. I think when you activate space, there's a different aspect to that because you're putting your own body on the line. And I think that's when we go back to, I was on another call where we were trying to redefine what safety means, because safety means different things to different people. And like maybe safety is more equated to like uncomfortableness, like not feeling safe, uncomfortable. But like when you think safety, you think, oh, my property or this piece of land, but it's not always equated to my body as being safe. So I think we have to kind of, when we think about activating space, it's a very different definition, because if you're just giving the lip service or saying I support, but you're not really activating or demonstrating, it means something else.
And it can take different forms. Like, you know, it may be demonstrating for someone, it may be supporting an effort in a community for someone else. It may mean talking, you know, going downtown and having the conversation. I have a friend, we were having a conversation this morning, but it was like, it's not a one-way conversation, right? It's not about getting, like, it is not about taking, like, because of the question earlier, right? It's not about going from Oak Park to Austin. It actually needs to be a dialogue, right? Oak Park can learn from what's happening in Austin. Austin can share and learn from things happening in Oak Park, and both can hold each other accountable, right? So we have to understand this is a dialogue, and it's not one way, and it's not top down, and it's not just grassroots or just top down, right? It's somewhere in the middle. It's when those two things come together.
Yeah, like a more horizontal, like we can all sit here and have a conversation, and all of our words mean just as much as anyone else's words.
Yeah.
Lauren, did you have anything to add on that? Thank you, Monica.
Yeah, I mean, and the last piece is we can't assume that everybody knows. So education is in the forefront. Like I just told my colleagues before, we weren't taught in school what Tulsa was. We weren't taught what Rosewood was. A lot of people weren't taught that in their history books. So it's it's not a reteaching, but kind of doing your own research and asking questions.
I agree. I'd like to call in Terry, if you can unmute your video, your question in response to the question on access to capital, if you'd like to Ask the panel. Terry Haymaker?
Yes. Is that unmuted?
Yes.
Right. I just heard thank you very much. I just heard a conversation earlier about access to capital and really making sure that it's equitable and that we're following along with our goals and our values behind that. And I thought that might be I don't know if I have a specific question, although I'd love to hear everybody's comments on it because you all come from, sounds like, different perspectives, which I also think that might be, somebody put on the chat, like, how can WP+D, participate and be more active in this conversation going forward. And that might be a way to do it, a narrow topic like that, maybe do some groups and really talk about it and figure out ways in which we can, grow what's already out, make change. So not really a straightforward question. I recognize like a little bit of a circular sentence I just said. That's what, and I'm so you can still hear me.
We can hear you now.
Terry, I think that's a great comment and sort of thread to what
Okay.
we've been talking about it. To the comment, to the part about the sort of creating conversation, having dialogue, as the example in the fundraising and the dialogue of today is a fantastic example of sort of steps that I think are completely in the right direction. And then I think mentorship really needs to come in. I mean, if we want to change the design landscape broadly, right? This isn't exclusive to a specific design landscape, but if we want to impact the design landscape, we have to mentor and we have to provide exposure and we have to support students moving into design fields so that the profession can fundamentally change and have more people of color.
For sure. Right. And so like with the Invest Southwest initiative, with the corridor managers, the LISC is hiring, but the thing is, we don't want to set our partners up for failure. That's it's a couple of $1 million, but how do you develop focus? It's a lot of capacity building that has to be done for those newer organizations, and we don't want, it's like Monica was saying, it's about that mentorship and consulting the best way possible, and hearing the perspective from specifically from the partner to see where they are. But it's really about, we have to do a better job with really putting more dollars into capacity building for our Black-led organizations. AMPed, Advancing Nonprofits, is a new organization that's come out within the last month. I'm serving on the board, but that's their main purpose, is to fund capacity building initiatives so that they can eventually become self-sustainable.
I think you just solved half the questions by saying capacity building. I think that's at the basis of so many things that are being discussed right now.
I agree. Thank you so much, you all. And we also have a question from Janet Lee. Janet, if you would like to unmute.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I feel like my question there's so many other questions that popped up, but thank you for entertaining mine. So my question is, how do you grapple with trying to make headways in dismantling racial structural practices, but at the same time having to use the tools that were created by structural racism? like tax credits and subsidies?
Maybe you abuse. Go ahead, Lauren. I think you.
Oh, well, I mean, one thing that we kind of unfortunately have to do is be a part of the system to change the system. So we're working with the city, even though we might not like them all the time. We don't hold back on what needs to be done, and the partners do a great job with that. And so we do have to be a part of the problem in order to change the system.
Thanks, Lauren. Monica, you had an additional comment.
Well, I think that was actually a better answer. I think I was going to say sort of abusing the tools, but I think what you said about be a part of the system to change the system is a much more appropriate and also more achievable response, right? Like pulling from this and using it differently, or, corrupting the system doesn't solve the system, right? But if you become part of the system or work within the system and use that to then advance a broader agenda or a broader access, then that makes more sense. So I think you're absolutely right, Lauren, with how you're describing it.
I think we just have to get creative with how to use this access, and not just use our traditional or historic ways of doing things, and just like think outside the box a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's like all of you are saying. I don't think it's one right way to look at any of these things. To be able to use all of them at once, the different frameworks, to be able to look at all of it in order to ensure that these issues are being handled. And I think we have time for one additional question, so please feel free to write your question in the chat and I will get to it before we move on to our social.
There's so many great comments in the chat. I'm just sort of scrolling through. I think there's new ones coming in. Either grab that, or I see one about sort of the idea of setting the table and building the table. Like it may be some examples. Camille, I don't know if you want to kick that one off, but maybe a specific example.
I think when we talk about like setting the table and building the table, and we have these community engagement efforts, we have to be very specific. And I think this looks like making sure there are funds in your budget for these pillars within the community. If you're going to ask people to sit in these meetings and give feedback for your job, you have to make sure that they're being monetarily supported for that time, especially when they might have a full-time job where they have to work so many hours and then come to a meeting in the evening or whenever it is. And that's a lot of time. So I think it makes sense that if this is the work that we're going to do, we have to change the way we use these funds. And monetarily supporting community pillars is, I think, a really important piece of that.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add to that, there's one of my friends is doing a project on 61st and King Drive for Black women to become carpenters. It's a training program to, and they will be creating a table. So Monica will be coming to a hood near you. But they built this table, and they are a literal table, yes, Kathleen, and they are talking about what is going on in their lives. And then, and again, Camille, this goes on to Black spaces where we don't have time, we don't have the ability to sit and really reflect. We always have to do work, solve problems, put out fires, but we never sit down and talk about, and that's the mental health portion that has to, we have to have those spaces for us to be able to be, and to ask other women that look like me, how are you feeling? You know, people have a hard time like answering that question, how you doing? And it's a quick answer of I'm okay, or I'm good, but to decompress, like what happened today? And so we really, that's the table that people that were marginalized and oppressed need to create for themselves to process before we let a whole bunch of other people try to process it for us.
I agree. Lauren, girl, you've been preaching
Lauren, you
today.
You invited the wrong person.
Man, you ladies are a great bunch. I really appreciate all of your answers, all of your perspectives and commentary today. If we can, I'll try to squeeze in this last question, and we definitely have to roll into that social. So I believe we had a question from Karen. Regarding how can we be better allies for our colleagues of color and help support and recruit more? If you could unmute. Catherine? All right, we'll give it a couple more minutes and then we'll just roll into the social.
I would love, Lauren and Camille and actually everybody, I would love to continue this conversation, but I gotta say, like, this is a real honest conversation in a way that's kind of refreshing.
Yes, it's been really, really great. I've been on an all-day unconference, they're calling it, called Cut and Fill. It was a landscape architecture based conference, but we've been having these conversations all day, different breakout sessions, et cetera. But it's really refreshing to see how honest people are allowing themselves to be and how genuinely interested people are in seeing change. And I think that's like the biggest step, like genuinely wanting to be a part of this change and just trying to figure out where to get started. So I think having these conversations is really important. And then we can continue to have these conversations and move forward with making these changes.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, and I think WP+D, APA, I really appreciate you guys having this space. It's been a real space. It's Breonna, and then I have to say this again, Breonna Taylor and several other individuals, killers are still out there, and they unfortunately are police officers. So it's still a lot of work to be done. I'm like that dog with the blue and the brown eye. My dad is a police officer, and but you see all of these issues going around. I can't wait till he retires. But it's a much needed conversation. It's a much needed partnership with all of the people on this planet to really work hard against, because when one person is affected, we're all affected. Whether or not it might not come to your door, at some point it's gonna hit you. So thanks again for having this space. I can't wait to talk and see, or eventually we'll get to be in a space where we could touch hands. But this has been great.
Thank you so much. I definitely agree with all of you guys having great intention when joining in the movement, in the fight against these issues is definitely important. And also, as you were saying, Lauren, everything should be direct. Even when it doesn't look direct, it is a direct impact that it's having on all of our lives, and we should think of it as so. And I really appreciate you guys. You're such a great panelist, and I'm so glad that we had you today. I appreciate you sharing your perspectives, and I hope you join us again to continue this conversation in the future.